Hello everyone and welcome to Flight Club. My name is Klaus Leopold and I am the co-founder of Flight Levels Academy and I'm also the co-host of this show here. Co means there are at least two. So the second host is Cliff. Cliff, please say hi.
Hi everyone. Nice to see you all. Awesome. So this evening we have a fantastic guest with us, joining us all the way from the United States of America. We have Heidi Helfand. She is the author of a wonderful book. Sorry about this. It's a wonderful book called Dynamic Reteaming, and I'm getting my tongue twisted on the title, and I'm going to have to say that a bunch more times. So hopefully it'll be more funny the next time around. Anyway, welcome Heidi. It's lovely to have you here today.
Thanks, Cliff. Thanks, Klaus. Great to be here.
Cool. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself for those of us who've never met you before? Maybe some people are interested to know who we're talking to and what you have to say.
Sure. My name's Heidi Helfand, and I've worked in the software industry about 20 years, based in Southern California. And a lot of my experience comes from working in startups that became public companies or got acquired. And so my area of expertise is in helping teams grow, change, shift, morph, and scale into larger organizations. Currently, I work as Director of R&D Excellence at Procore Technologies. We're a software company headquartered in Carpinteria, California. And we're changing the lives of everyone in construction. We have software as a service. We're connecting people in construction to a global platform. So I'm really happy to, and I thank Procore for being supportive in the work that I do, as well as being really supportive about my book. So.
It's always a good thing to have a company that's supportive of the things that you're passionate about. So that is very wonderful.
Yeah, I love the company. I've been there about 3 years.
Cool. Awesome. So before we get into too much of the discussion about your topics and about the book that you've written, I want to just welcome everybody officially and say if you enjoy the show, please remember to hit subscribe. And if you would like to get reminders, hit the bell icon that is next to the subscribe button. That'll mean you'll get a notification whenever we add another video, whether it's a live stream or just a normal video. And of course, as we like to joke and say, the first rule of Flight Club is that you should, of course, talk about Flight Club, which is partly what we're doing now. And so I would also invite you to tell your friends, tell everybody about what we're doing here. Come have a chat with us on Twitter, join our meetup group. I will paste the links shortly in the chat. And come join us in the future. Let's continue this conversation and keep telling people about it. Cool. So enough about Flight Club. You've come mostly to listen to what Heidi has to say. So Heidi, some people probably have gathered from our promotion of this that you've written a book. What inspired you to write the book? What was behind it?
Yeah, I think the main reason I wrote the book, Dynamic Reteaming, was to really just try to dig in, prove the point that you don't have to have a team that stays the same or is stable to have build into a successful software company. Being in the industry for as long as I have, as part of, I was 10th member of a startup that grew to now it's in the thousands, for example. Your teams are growing, shifting, changing all along. And so I was thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. Things that I would read were like, no, the goal is keep your teams the same. And as I was coaching software teams at a company called Appfolio, I was like, wait a minute, that's counter to our business goals of growing and scaling into a larger company. If we try to really kind of maintain and keep things more stable than changeable, it doesn't really help our company succeed. And I think it's more appropriate, just from my professional experience as a practitioner, to kind of lean into the changes, amplify them, help them succeed, as opposed to fighting change. So I became curious about this topic. I thought, well, wait a minute. I had my experience at Appfolio. I had my experience at a startup where we were acquired by Citrix, where we built GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar. These two companies are very successful companies. And so I was kind of like, well, wait a minute, we're not doing it wrong by keeping our teams the same. It's more about leaning in and helping kind of morph into the structure we need to be going forward. So, and then I was like, wait, is this just Southern California. So I became curious, interviewed worldwide colleagues, and wrote the first version of Dynamic Reteaming. And now I've just republished it with O'Reilly as a second edition with new content.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think from my experiences that, people say, oh, well, we need to have these stable teams and everything should be kind of, as consistent and stable as possible. But then, of course, reality has some new and novel ideas, and probably things don't stay quite as stable as we were thinking when we first started out with that idea. Before we get into that topic, though, I wanted to kind of get a little bit of a sense. A lot of people talk about a team in different forms. Those people over there are a team. You go have a conversation with them and they've barely met each other. And unfortunately, this is quite common. So tell me, in your own experience, how would you define a team? What makes a team a team?
Yeah, so I think a team is two or more people that are working and that have kind of joint accountability for the thing that they're building or the service that they're creating. So they have this kind of shared work that they collaborate on together. And it's not like they're together called a team and they're working on things in parallel. And they have this kind of like joint work together. So it's like there's an interdependency there. Yeah, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's basically around having a common goal. Like that's really the main thing. We have something that we need to do together. So if my goal is to do something that's not even remotely related or sometimes even in tension with yours, well, I don't know. Do we have a team? Probably not. It's sort of, we're the marketing team, but we all do different things and we have nothing to do with each other. This is sort of so I kind of define it a little bit by what it's not, but then if you flip it around, common goal, some shared purpose, that seems to make sense to me.
So I'm a German native speaker, and there's also the word team, of course, in German. But for me, it's more like a small group. So it's not about 50 people or something like this. Team is always like, I don't know, 5 people, 10 people, something like this. So does size matter when it comes to teams? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's really like a concentric notion of teams, because in English, at least, American English, which is what I speak, people might refer to a team as being like the whole company. It's our team. People might refer to a team of 5 as the team, or a department as a team. So I think in a lot of ways, it's not always very exacting. Sometimes it's maybe a director and the people who report to that person, yet they work in different parts of the organization. They still refer to themselves as team. So, I guess in one case, I'm kind of like, well, who's to say what a team is or isn't? If people want to focus their identity as a team, could that be potentially meaningful and useful to them? Probably. So go ahead, call yourself a team. I know, people distinguish between like team and group, and like a group being maybe people that report to the same person, but they really live kind of separate lives. And then it gets awkward when they meet together because maybe they have a community of practice, and that emerges to share techniques. For example, across like a team of coaches. Well, if you're not really working with the same teams, your day-to-day is quite different. So you want to probably organize differently when you get together. I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, but there's different facilitation techniques, whether you're, I think, more of a group versus more of a cross-functional software development team is a particular type of team that's different than maybe a customer service team that organizes a bit differently. So,
I
there's
think
a lot
that's
of variety out there.
I think that's interesting because I remember from hearing one of your talks not so long ago, which was the first time that we met. You were talking a lot about that idea that we really want to get the benefit of collaboration, and that's really what we're trying to get out of this. And so if we're not collaborating, to me this seems a little bit like, well, what's the point in having a stand-up or trying to get ourselves to know each other and work together when we're never actually touching even the same remotely similar things? So, I think that's interesting.
I think we'll find that sometimes one of the key reasons teams might split in half is because their work becomes unrelated. It just gets kind of awkward. You need
Yeah.
sort of maybe a reason to be listening to each other, and it needs to go beyond let's share information with each other. I think it
Yeah.
needs to be a little more crunchy if we're together on a cross-functional software development team and we're working on the same mission versus multiple missions.
Yeah.
It's a different experience.
I think that makes sense.
So I think team and work are related. Like we're the people together, maybe we have an identity, maybe we have a name, but the work has something to do with it. Well, why are we together? What are we getting paid to do at the end of the day? Like, why do we exist? What's our mission? What are our goals? How do we want to operate? So, these are fun things to figure out with teams.
Well, there pops up something in my mind. So I'm not sure how to phrase this, but what I see quite often is, so we have, for instance, something like a top management team. But when we say, okay, it's about collaboration and stuff, so quite often I think, or what I observe as an external person, like a top management team is more like a group of competitors. So what do you think about a top management team?
Yeah, like a top management team, I'd be, if they were viewing themselves as a group of competitors, that is a little frightening to me, because I think they need to work well together, collaborate, and have a unified front, unified goals. And they might, are you talking about like an executive team at the top of a company?
Yeah, for instance,
So I love, Patrick Lencioni, he wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He wrote the book, The Advantage. I mean, the Advantage is a great one. Do you want to be a bowling team where you're kind of all working in parallel, trying to knock down all the pins? Or do you want to be more of a basketball team where you work together and you pass the ball and you have these kind of joint goals? And I think there's always a lot of work to do on any team to kind of identify and sustain how they work together as a team. It's really not one and done, calibrate the team and then you're done, because people usually come and go from any team. So it's kind of like, I think, coaching really helps to help any kind of team, whether it's an executive team or otherwise, really kind of decide how they want to be together.
Yeah.
And, So I like to work with different kinds of teams and help them kind of figure that out and calibrate as a team. It's one of the things I write about in the second edition of my book.
Cool. I want to jump back a little bit to something we were talking about earlier. So we said there's this idea of, a lot of people want stable teams, and you said that, very often your reality was a little bit different from that expectation. Can you tell us a little bit about that reality? What sort of things are causing, the need for changes in team membership? What's influencing it? How do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are a variety of reasons, and I think why teams change, why organizations change. One of them is growth or attrition. People are going to join your team, they're going to join your company, and then they're going to leave. And sometimes this happens at a very rapid pace, and sometimes it happens at not so rapid pace, where you're kind of onboarding people into a team or two, but that doesn't happen that frequently. But in other contexts, maybe it's like a regular occurrence. Maybe the team and the company, maybe they're doubling in size. And so there are things that you can do to kind of facilitate that. Growth is one. I think you might find also that if a team grows really fast and it grows large, one of the natural consequences is that team will split, divide, or subdivide. And I've seen that in growing software companies at the team level, at the team of teams level, at department levels. So reteaming covers all this ground, and there are different tactics depending on kind of where you're at. So growth is one of the key things. Yeah. And there's I can go into other reasons why teams change as well if you want me to do that now, or if you want to segue into something else.
No, I think this is an interesting one to explore, because I think a lot of companies are in that situation where they're growing for various reasons, whether they're just trying to keep up with demand, or, as was a lot of my experience working in a startup, is that, we went from 700 to 5,000 over the course of 4 years, sorry. And then that's just insane. The idea that you can have anything sort of relatively stable in that kind of environment is a little bit absurd. However, most companies are not quite in that sort of situation. And so there's a lot of things that tend to influence it. And for me, one of the things that often affects the makeup of a team is things like restructure or people, as you said, coming or going for various reasons within the company. I'm curious, we've all seen restructures done badly, I think. I know I've seen my fair share of that. I'm less interested in exploring sort of what's gone wrong, but when you've seen it done well, or like team composition changing and these kind of things, how have you seen it done well? What were the contributing factors?
Yeah. My favorite way that I've seen teams change is when it's the team's idea, when teams are encouraged and they know that they can reflect on how they work together, and that team composition can be part of that discussion. I've seen some great teams decide that, hey, it feels like our work is unrelated. Our meetings are taking like a long time. It's so hard for us to make decisions. What if we try an experiment where we split into two teams and then we talk about that a few months later? So they kind of have this period of like reflecting, trying an experiment with changing their composition, and then seeing, well, how did that play out? I really love it when that happens. And I think I've facilitated a lot of that in my career when people have sort of noticed that, hey, it feels like we're not as effective as we used to be. This happens a lot, I think, with first teams in startups that kind of grow bigger and then they split. So that's like my favorite way, is when it's the idea of the people and they're really kind of encouraged and engaged to own their composition. And I think, self-organizing team, self-managing team, all these words that some of us have heard for years. It's wonderful when it can be really sort of made more specific, operationalized. Well, what do we mean by this? And what's our definition at our company? So that's like, I think it's great when it's like that. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily be easier to switch or that everything is going to be all rosy. Any kind of team change is a disruption. And so sometimes it's not, this stuff isn't easy, which is another reason why I wrote this book. But I think we need to lean into it and get better about it, better at how we manage these things, especially, if you have an org that's 150 people and it's one kind of entity and you're breaking it into 3 entities, it's a whole different set of challenges. And if you include, I think if you try to be as inclusive as possible with the people who are doing the work, maybe visualizing a reorg on a set of whiteboards. We did that once at Procore when we had an infrastructure tribe that split into a few different tribes. We visualized opportunities and people had the chance to say, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. Talk to the manager in charge of the team. Would it be possible if I worked over here? Or I want to stay where I'm at. Is this cool if I'm here? So there are different tactics to be inclusive of people. And so yeah, that's another thing I like.
Yeah, cool. So there are the first questions coming in. Regis is asking, Heidi, what do you consider as a sustainable change in terms of keeping the performance of a small team, up to 10 people, if there are changes each month or each 3 months, for instance?
Yeah, so anytime you have a change to a team, let's say you're looking at metrics like cycle time stability, you're going to see that things are probably going to slow and then maybe get back up to where you were, or maybe even get better. You're going to see a performance hit, loosely defined as however you define it at your company. You will see things slowed, but you're going at different changes for a more longer term benefit. There's no magic cadence for when to add someone to a team or when someone leaves a team. I like the eco-cycle metaphor that I learned about through Liberating Structures and from the book Panarchy, which is, I believe that teams really kind of age and change through time. As we all know, people join our company, people leave our company for whatever reason that's out of our control. I think it's natural that teams will change. I think it's easier, though, when it's like a reteaming at the edges. Many of us will onboard a new team member. It is like the slightest reteaming, or maybe a team member will leave, and that's less disruptive than if we split the team in half. So kind of depends on the types of changes.
Yeah.
I've talked with companies who deliberately would reteam in order to spread knowledge, or they would take someone from one team and put them on another team, and then they pair program. And then once they felt like, this knowledge feels like it can be owned by this team, they can work on future stories related to it, then they go back to their team. So you can do this. Basically, what you do is you start somewhere, do an experiment, and then reflect on it later. Try, if you want to do regular switching, try a 3-month cadence and reflect on it, and then you adjust it. So it's a lot of experimentation and learning.
Yeah.
So, what have you seen?
Well, I kind of like what you just said. So when we say, okay, stable teams is good if you want to have predictability or whatever. So, but it's not the goal. Maybe I don't care about predictability, for instance. Maybe I'm growing quite fast, so it makes sense that I rotate knowledge. So here it makes sense. So it's not only that it's not bad to reteam, it's actually necessary to reteam. So it's positive if we are doing it. It's not negative, but it's positive, right? So do you know other aspects where you say, okay, that's why we have to do reteaming, actually?
So like, what are cases where you must reteam?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think one of the drivers, again, is an influx of people. Another driver could be we want to work on a brand new product, and it might make sense to have people form a different team off to the side working differently in order to innovate. So it could be that you have a completely different type of work. Sometimes teams emerge to solve emergencies or crises. And it feels like maybe if the team that they're coming from is working on like the maintenance of a software product that's been out there for a while and the cadence is pretty slow, you have to work, whenever you have to work at kind of a different cadence or speed, I think it helps to be in a separate team. There's some stories in my book about a company called SecureDocs that was incubated within another company, Appfolio, and it was a team off to the side. I call it the isolation pattern, and they were given process freedom to iterate very quickly. And it didn't feel like to do that same kind of work as like a new story within an existing Scrum team. Felt like the cadence was mismatched. So they had great process freedom also to kind of go fast separately. It was a really cool experience. We did it at the first startup I was at too, when we were building a product. We were going to change the world with screen sharing technology for live tech support. I was an interaction designer back then with that team. I was a writer as well, and nobody was buying our product, and we had to pivot as a startup. And then we built a product called Go to My PC. I was on the small team off to the side that was given this process freedom. And I kind of like thought about, I was really upset and distraught because it was early in my career. I was really attached to the first product. I cried about it, that we couldn't work on it anymore. But at the end of the day, it wasn't making money. The company would have failed if we would have kept going in that direction. But I got to be part of this small team off to the side, and it was awesome. And I believe we saved the company, and then we built GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar years later. But, reteaming can save companies, like that example shows. But I think there's really cool ways to create teams. Sometimes teams go away. There's sad stories about it. I think a lot of these things have flip sides. And there's things you can do to say goodbye to your team, because sometimes teams dissolve. They don't last forever.
Yeah. Cool. So there are two comments or two questions which could go quite well together. So Eduardo is asking, can reteaming conflict the team sociology, like and the tribal dynamics, like belongings, safety? And there's another question from Rita. And she's asking, is there anything in your book about psychological safety and how that affects individuals in the teams?
Yeah, I think like a lot of practices, your mileage may vary. You might have a very challenging reteaming. You might be working in a company and suddenly you're going through a reorg, it's completely out of your control, information is obscured, you're not quite sure where you're going to fit in. This is definitely not an easy situation. You can't expect to snap people into a new org structure without human transition time. And so how you reteam and how you work on your capacity in your company to reteam is really important. I think leaders that are organizing and working on reorgs that impact a lot of people. I mean, this is at all different levels in the company. It's just these things are going to happen. But how can we develop a capacity to improve how we go about this, to improve our planning, our execution, and our follow-up on any large reteaming activity? So I think retrospectives at that level is really important. It's not a one and done kind of thing. A lot of change in general, whether it's reteaming or otherwise, you're assigned to a new manager, can trigger a lot of fear. And so it's our job as leaders to really try to facilitate processes which are inclusive, which get the input of the people that are doing the work, which recognize that, hey, you can make a structural change and you can write it on paper and you can cascade the message, but you have to coach your teams through change. So that's where I think becoming aware of psychological safety, becoming aware of the fact that many reorgs, a lot of reteaming triggers concerns of safety and triggers a lot of fear. I mean, that's very much present. And that's addressed in the book. I think, I wish that I had a magic prescription for how all of these can go really well all the time. The fact is, this stuff is really, really hard. It's really, really hard. Sometimes we're going to catalyze the changes and maybe we're empowered to do so. Like we were talking about the team that splits in half and it's their idea. But other times there are going to be forces at play and that they're going to impact our daily lives at our companies. They're going to cause changes that we don't necessarily want. It's the idea of panarchy. It's written in a book by Gunderson and Halling. But I had the book right here. And there are changes at the individual level, the team level, the team of teams level, the company level. And now look at what we're going through globally with COVID-19. This isn't something that any of us expected, or at least I didn't expect it. And there are changes to teams and organizations that we probably would not have chosen, but we need to adapt. We need to try to be there for the people because there's a lot of fear. Is my job going to be safe? We see announcements and news in LinkedIn and Twitter and New York Times, whatever you read, you hear about companies that need to downsize, that are laying off people. And if it's the first time that you're going through something like that or experiencing it from a leadership position, it can be really, really challenging. You're trying to do the best that you can. But the fact is, there's a lot of fear present. So how can we learn from this stuff and try to do it better the next time? How can we build this sort of reteaming muscle? So that there's content about that in my second edition that wasn't in my first edition. But I think these are really good questions because there's, I don't know what Cliff and Klaus, what you've experienced in your careers, but your mileage may vary and this stuff isn't easy.
I would definitely like to ask this Cliff, because Cliff, you used to work for Spotify before we founded the Flight Levels Academy, and I can imagine that this is a topic within, or still a topic, and has been a topic within Spotify, right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the challenges in that space was just the rapid growth. I mean, there was constant change in that sense. Like I said, 700 to 5,000, it's kind of ludicrous. But there were a couple of novel cases where we did something really cool that I quite liked. We were doing, I guess it was, from the outside, it looks like a restructure is probably the best term for it. But it differed in a couple of key ways. So one of the things that I've seen be the most common way that a company does a restructure is a bunch of very smart senior people go off in a room and they think about something for about 6 months or so. They decide maybe what the structure is going to be, who's got new authorities and who's going to be in charge. All of the things are going to change. And then they announce it to people in a way that's kind of like, well, here it is and now it's done. And you just have to get on board. And then we wonder why people are resisting change. And the most common thing that I find inside this is that people actually just don't understand what it is that you're trying to solve or why you were doing it in the first place. And, there's a little bit of fear around how does this affect me and so on and other things. But just simply like, I don't really get what you're trying to achieve. So what we did differently was we said, actually, it came from a bunch of folks within the team. And so this was a tribe of about 85 people or so. We call them tribes. Maybe some people have heard of that term before. But basically, the idea was what we need to do is we need to realize that something about the team makeup is not really working. And so we had a scenario similar to what you were describing earlier, where we needed to work on a different set of products. And there was vision from the company that was saying, we need to go in this direction and that direction and this direction. We're saying we can't do all of it with the current makeup. So we need to change our structure in some way. And we said, well, rather than me or 2 or 3 other people making all the decisions, let's have some conversation amongst ourselves, say, okay, we're pretty sure we need to solve this problem, and that problem, and probably not these. That has some implications on the structure, the team makeup. What do you folks think about this at a high level first? And then people can weigh in and say, actually, well, there's this other, big part of the product. In this case, it was partly supporting the customer service. People said, well, actually, that's a lot of work. We're going to need more people on that. And you can't, make it a smaller area. Okay, cool. Back to the drawing board, a little bit more thinking. Okay, now we've got this version. What do you think? And then it came time to say, okay, now we've landed on a structure that makes sense. Who's going to be in what teams? And again, open it up to the group to say, okay, let's have a conversation about that. So what we did was we gave everybody the information about what the structure was going to look like. We had some sort of rough idea that we discussed with everybody around how many people would be on each team, and basically left it up to everybody to figure out, yeah, I want to work with those people, or I want to work on this technology, or actually I'm thinking maybe now's the time for a new challenge. And so it was really, really quite powerful. For sure, there were challenges. The stuff is never easy, as you said, but I think including people in the conversation goes already like 10 miles further than most companies are going with this stuff, because we just design it in a back room somewhere and then surprise, here's one I made earlier. And it's weird. I find it so weird. Like, you talk to your customers, why don't you talk to your employees? Like,
well, if you think of a leadership team in engineering or in R&D, it's one thing to be managing the people. You're building the company as you're building the products as well. And so I think if you visualize your work as this leadership team and you talk about how you're building the organization, you talk about the principles that you want to apply as you kind of learn and grow, I think that can be really powerful. And including the people, as you're saying, is just wonderful. If we can always kind of opportunity match, like there's a new opportunity to build something over here. Someone on a team over here, maybe they felt like, I've been on this team forever. I'm really ready for a change. If they don't hear about opportunities within your company, they're going to find them elsewhere. And so it's a lot of opportunity matching, engaging people in problem solving about their own structure. We're professionals. We solve all sorts of problems. This is just another type, help us be included.
Yeah,
I think it can go a long way. The even more open than some of the structures we've been talking about with like whiteboards or meetings is the like self-selection marketplaces and other things. Redgate Software, Chris Smith added a new story to the book, which they talk about how they do a self-selection event to change up their team compositions. That's an even more open kind of structure than we've experimented with, with the whiteboards. I've done the open marketplaces with different events like Hack Days in the past as well, which is a good, as Sandy Mamoli would say in her book, Creating Great Teams. She wrote a book about this with David Moll, which is an excellent how to run a self-selection event, Creating Great Teams. But they have some really good kind of guidelines and tactics in there. And it's like a structures of openness. So I think sometimes we're reteamed because we don't even know the people who've reteamed us. We've just kind of learned through a cascading message that we're on a different team. That's like one side of the spectrum. Another side of the spectrum is, well, we decide that we're going to form a new team. It's kind of like the opposite. I think it's a continuum of different kinds of freedom and choice. Chapter 3 or something in my book, which talks about this. So there's different ways where we can form teams. And it's kind of like, well, who are we as an organization? What do we want it to be like? What's sort of that user experience of the software engineer from when I get onboarded until I leave? What is that experience path? And what do we want that to be like? Well, maybe we value inclusion. Maybe we value your professional opinion as a software engineer, and we want your input, and we want you to have a big say in how we organize in order to attain our mission. Like, I think that's awesome. So I'd like to see more conversations about things like that in our industry, because I don't think it needs to be this. I think people can be included and trusted. So.
Yeah, I would hope so. So there are more questions coming in, and I won't put them in the order like they appear, because I think this question fits a little bit to what we were just talking. So Tanya is asking, what would you suggest? How can team building be done the best way when the new team setups during COVID-19? Like, everyone is in home office right now, and the whole team building process is remote. So how do you start it today, actually?
Oh, okay. So let's say you have a new team. How do you get the team up and running in this situation where we're all
in this situation where we're
at home?
in? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think definitely using tools that facilitate having discussions in small groups, pairs, and larger groups is a great kind of tool set to have, and having a shared frame of reference, whether it be a document, slide deck, shared whiteboard for looking at and working on the same objects. So I think there's something about having tools in place, and we make the best of what we have at our companies, especially if during these days it could be a luxury to get a license for a new piece of technology. So it's kind of like, let's take inventory of what we have. So tooling is part of it. Being able to, I think, not have your meetings all be broadcast where everyone is silent and 2 people are talking. There's different ways that you can facilitate. I think the book Facilitator's Guide for Participatory Decision Making, liberatingstructures.com, those give way to some methods to use to make the online meeting experience more engaging. And I think also, if I'm working with a new team, whether it's through the web like this, whether it's virtual or not, I usually focus on people, work, and workflow, right? I facilitate a 2-hour activity. I did it twice last week. I'm doing it again on Friday with a team. It's my version of a market of skills where people share about themselves. We use an online slide deck where people talk about the skills they have, what they want to learn, what their role is, and we react to these mini presentations. We do pair work in breakout rooms, for example. So we share who we are as people. We've got to align on the work that we're doing. What is the area of work that we're focusing on? What is the mission of our team? Why does it exist? What does success look like? What are the first few kind of stories that we're going to be working on? So we focus on the work and align on the work. So people, work. And the third is the workflow. Many of us use online tools for managing our workflows. And so, so we align how we're going to do that, how we're going to track our work online. What does it mean for something to be done after, for code review to be complete? What does that mean? For something to be ready to be merged, what does that mean? So we align on the different kind of phases of our workflow. So I focus in those 3 areas: people, work, workflow. And I call them team calibration. So I'll work with someone that's on a team, and we'll talk and we'll figure out kind of, what do they need now? I'll coach the team for 2 hours, and then we'll follow up maybe in a few weeks. I don't spend like a day. My sweet spot is trying to do something with a team for 2 hours or less. Everybody is busy, so it's more of kind of ongoing coaching. But yeah, team calibrations are another area that I've expanded upon in the book. Here's the second version. And I have like some step-by-step activities in here that I think are pretty useful that I use day to day. And I put them in there because people were always asking me about them. So it's kind of handy to have them in the book.
Yeah, and I think there's a question from Marcello which pretty much fits into this, I guess. So he's asking like, okay, in an old company, like 100 years and older, and also the people are there for quite some long time already, there's not a lot of culture of innovation there. What would be your approach to somehow explain them or motivate them that reteaming is actually a good thing?
Yeah. So I think like if your goal is to try to get them to do something differently, no matter what it is, you need to create an awareness and an interest in the thing. What problem are you trying to solve? I guess even backing up even further, like, well, what's your goal? What kind of problem are you trying to solve? Getting alignment within your leadership teams, within your teams about the importance of solving that problem is important. Usually I would expose people to something like, for example, one of the initiatives that I'm working on with architect Tim Doherty at Procore is we're trying to promote having stable cycle times in our teams so that we can leverage more advanced forecasting tools to answer the question, when is this stuff going to be done, right? We're building all these things. When is it going to be done? Well, we might want to leverage like a Monte Carlo tool or something like that. But we really want to bring a literacy about cycle time stability. So we have a lunch and learn, actually a second lunch and learn internal to our company on July 30th, where an engineer who we've coached and has worked with cycle time stability, he's going to do a case study. So for other engineers to see how their squad is working and what they've learned while experimenting with the tools that we're trying to diffuse. So I think having awareness building activities is important, especially by a similar type of role that you're trying to influence. It's really exciting to hear case studies. It's exciting to hear when things are challenging, don't always go the way that you expected, and when people have success with things as well. So I think you have to like build an awareness, and then usually you try to create a pull so people want you to come in and help them with whatever it is you're doing. Like in our case, we've trained more than 20 squads in using some lean agile techniques to improve their predictability, and we're doing this through a lot of kind of grassroots influencing. So people come to us and they sign up, as opposed to us trying to force people to do things, which never really works. Yeah. So we're trying to help people solve a problem. So I think I would caution anyone who tries to like go in and suddenly reorg your teams because you heard about this reteaming concept. That's a dangerous kind of path to proceed along. So it's kind of like, all right, well, so you want, maybe you want to talk with the people in the organization about what their experience is like. Some people have engagement surveys at a regular basis or have retrospectives at different levels to try to glean the sentiment of the people on a particular topic. You need to kind of meet organizations where they are and focus on kind of pertinent problems that people want to invest in. So I think.
I think that thing of understanding the problem you're trying to solve is so important. Yes. I mean, regardless of whether you're reteaming or changing the structure in some other form or keeping it the same, what's the goal behind it? And I think often we lose sight of that and end up making changes because somebody had an idea, or I don't know. I've heard. Yeah. Every time I think I've heard all the reasons, I hear a new reason why we should make changes.
But Cliff, it always goes back to this point. So no matter what we are talking about, so whenever we talk about flight levels and everything, it's always like, what's the problem you want to solve? But I don't know, maybe it's because the solution sounds so sexy, so I don't care about the problem. It will help somehow. I don't know, but I guess it's... Yeah, that's not, at least the flight levels thinking is totally different. It's like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And even here we get to this point.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, there's only so much focus you can have working on an initiative in your company, right? So maybe you can think of like 3 different potential impacts that you could make. Talk with your manager, like, I have these ideas. I think I could make these impacts. what do you think? And then figure out through talking with your leadership about, well, if we had that impact, right? Like greater sustainability, let's say, and less burnout, then okay, well, what outcomes do we need to create in order to make that impact? And who do we want to get together to work on those outcomes?
Sure.
And so there's kind of like this what's your impact thing. And and you meet with your leadership about is this the time for it? Certain things have a ripeness sometimes, and sometimes things just aren't ripe. You don't want to go there because it's not important for your company at that time. So it's
a great idea, but not right now, kind of thing.
But not right now. Maybe you've got other things to do that are a higher priority, and that I think it's part of the role of a manager to help people figure out what their focus can be. And we might get excited and inspired by different things. We'll see how it lands with your leadership before you invest too much time into it. Yeah.
I think also there's a thing of like a trade-off in a way as well. If you talked earlier about this sort of continuum between, different things that have a bit of a trade-off. And if you're on one end of the spectrum, there's usually a downside to the things, that you have right now. So, for example, if you centralize everything, maybe you have a bit more bureaucracy, things can take a little bit longer. Maybe you get a bit more consistency and standardization in terms of what comes out, but it could slow it down. And people might feel like their autonomy and their freedom is being taken away. You go the other way, you say, well, everybody's autonomous. Okay, great. We're all free to do what we want, but then we much harder to actually be aligned and go in the same direction because we end up charging off in different directions, and coordination becomes extra overhead and so on. And so I think all of these things, a lot of I would kind of describe my entire career as learning that everything that I thought was either or is actually a continuum and has a context in which it's applicable. And I'm still learning this to this day. So many things where it's absolutely agile is the best thing, or reteaming is the best thing, or this thing is the best. Like there's a context in which it's a bad idea, or actually creates more problems than it's worth. And so I think it's important to be able to step back a little bit and have the wisdom to go, what are the downsides of doing this? Because it's not just magic and ponies out the other side.
So, I mean, there's definitely a time for everything, and there's a time when things aren't appropriate.
Yeah.
So I guess there's an interesting comment from Marcus. I think we can answer this right away of what we've just talked here. So considering change is the unique constant we have to deal with, do you think we should avoid team stability and promote a culture of changes, like constantly reteaming? That's what I read out of it. So the answer would be maybe no, because if there is, if you are aiming for stability, then reteaming might not be the best thing to do right now. What do you think?
I think it's kind of like, well, what do you want to optimize for? If you know for sure that you are going to double in size, that you have a mandate to grow, right? Those words I've heard in the past, like we will grow into a larger company, and you see all the job ads. You're going to so many interviews, it's hard to get your work done. Like normalizing and just kind of pointing out that, hey, there's a lot of change happening around here, and it's going to continue for the foreseeable future is an important thing to talk about. I think also before you join a company, having leaders and interviewers share kind of what the dynamic is like, what the speed is like before you join is important. If you can kind of have that parity with your hiring practices and your onboarding and the actual kind of user experience of being an engineer, like you don't want to join like if there's no parity there, people are going to be misled, and so you don't want that. Like if you think of a company like Menlo Innovations, where they pair program all the time and they switch and they have their own kind of unique culture, you know that going in because you're pairing during interviews, right? And so you got to know what you're getting yourself into. And different companies have different change cadences. I don't think it's all, you'll see a lot of variety.
Sure. I think.
But yeah, I don't know. Did I answer the question?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about it a little bit as like part of what we're trying to do is say if you want to or you need to be changing the structure, there's a lot more that you need to think about than just saying, okay, these people are now over there, because
Yeah.
there's so much more. And I really liked what you said earlier, people, work, and workflow. I think this is a nice way of capturing it for me. It's like there's at least 3 dimensions that you need to consider when you're doing this. And so sure, we need to know who's now on the team, but also we need to know what are we doing and how do we do that together. And
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful way of thinking about it, because so often we just think about, I don't know, some pieces of that and not the whole.
Yeah, and that's kind of like there's like a before reteaming, a during reteaming, and an after. So
Yeah.
the after is like focusing on this people, work, and workflow. Like, how are we going to be productive? How are we going to, what are we working on together? And who are you? Right. So there's like all that
Yeah.
stuff. And how are we going to manage our work? And what does success look like? So there's
Yeah.
those kind of after reteaming. The during, right now with reteaming, if we're all at home, we probably have our office setups down. So there's kind of like less logistical overhead with a lot of reteaming, because we don't right now need to kind of physically, for those of us working remotely, we don't have to physically kind of coordinate all the logistics about who's going to sit where, and oh, we need IT department to hook some things up over here. It's so there's less kind of logistical overhead right now, which is kind of nice, and we can actually see and hear each other for the most part. Right?
most
It's
part.
not, we're not all in like 5 in one conference room, 10 in another, and 2 random people, and you can't see or hear people. There are some benefits to this remote stuff.
Sure.
But the before is also like, how can you get better at before reteaming? All right, well, what are you talking about? There are different tactics, whether it's a team of 13 that's reteaming versus an organization of 500. You're going to be doing different things. And one of the third part of my book talks about kind of coming up with like FAQs to describe your reteaming as a tool to use when you're planning it. Like, how would you communicate this reteaming? What problem are we trying to solve? And there's, various aspects to kind of consider, because there's a lot of variables related to reorganizing large groups of people. And you can't take it lightly, and you need to have a team that focuses on that and then gets better at doing it. So the different scales have different sort of tactics and advice.
So I'd like to actually jump in with a question. We talked about this a little bit before, but let's say that we've been doing some reteaming and forming teams and so on. What are the indicators that we're doing well or going in the right direction? What are your thoughts on this?
So I think you need to include the people in the feedback you collect about, well, what was the experience like when you're reteaming and how this all went, about the actual event and the transition, the structural change, and how we've adapted over to it. If you're talking, so there's that, right? And building the muscle in your company to get better at that, not just moving on to the next thing and not talking about how it went. We need to learn from this and maybe make some checklists for how we can do it better the next time, and kind of evolve in our effect.
I'm thinking partly about how would we tell if it's working? Like, are we getting better at this? Is this new structure better? Are we more capable of reteaming in the future? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think what we'll find is that we're in structure A, we reteam to structure B. We'll have a different set of challenges that we're going to work through, and we just need to learn our way forward. How are we getting the work done that we're committing to? Do our customers love the products that we're building? Are we able to get our work done at an acceptable cadence to our customers inside and outside of our companies? Are we building the right thing? We could have a very seamless process. We've got the cycle time stability, we've got predictability, but if we're building the wrong product, our company can fail, like the story I told earlier with the first startup I was at. So we have to be like building the right thing, getting it out there at an acceptable cadence. I think there's a big thing about, do we have the relationships in place where this experience is a learning experience for all of us? We feel engaged, motivated, and into the work that we're doing is another part of it. So it's really like the people, work, and workflow again. Like, you have the humans together. Do you have all the skill sets and diversity that you need in your resulting team in order to attain your goals and objectives. The workflow, we have to have some, we have to sync on how we're going to get the work done and through our team. But then we also have to be working on something that's valuable and that's going to sustain our business. So we need to, focus on all of the dimensions. You could have a really awesome flow, but the people don't like each other, or they're afraid to speak to each other and share a difference of opinion. So you could have that problem. You could have another problem where the people get along, they can speak about anything, they're psychologically safe, but you're working on something that nobody wants to buy. So then you're going to fail. So I think it's really those three dimensions again. For success of that, are you retaining people? Do you find that people are leaving?
That's such a big one in my experience. Yeah. Are the people actually sticking around? Like,
are the people sticking around?
Yeah. If people are running to hide under the nearest bush every time there's an opportunity, probably something's not so great. You can. I usually use that as a bit of an indicator. I mean, there can be other factors for sure that it's not necessarily always a problem, but it's definitely worth a look. So
yeah, I think that Cliff is like really related to like really kind of trying to always sort of understand the sentiment of the people and how the climate is in general terms. Like, how are people feeling about working at your company and staying there? There's different ways that you can try to gauge that through managers, through one-on-ones, through survey tools and other things, through events where you work on how can we collaborate better through an open space. You collect different metrics and then try to make some changes and then see how it goes. So I talk about metrics at the end of the book, and it's kind of like it depends on what you want to look at, but how do we know if like this stuff is working? Well, how are you going to measure it? What does success look like? When you have an initiative that you put together, you can define that from the start and, adapt and sure as you go along.
So we don't have so much time left, but there are still, I guess, some
There's quite
great
a few questions actually.
Questions still there.
Yeah.
So let's try to cover them at least quickly, if that's okay. So Juliana is asking something. So she's like, okay, she sees there's quite a lot of top-down reteaming being done. So the question, why is this happening so often? And the second part of the question I find quite interesting. What is the risk when there's only this top-down reteaming? What's your take on this?
Well, if your company gets acquired by another company, you might not be in that discussion and you need to kind of shift and adapt, or maybe find another opportunity somewhere else. Like, some of this stuff is just out of our control by the nature of what it is and the scale that it's at. I think it's just a fact of nature that sometimes you're going to have changes that maybe you want to catalyze or your team wants to catalyze, but then other times things outside your team are going to happen, and you get to choose how you respond to these situations. And I think we as an industry get to influence, well, how does this go down? It's one of the reasons I wrote this book, because it's kind of like, what do we want the experience to be like? We don't get to make all the decisions. That's just a fact of nature, unless you're in that leadership group or you're in that industry. If there are industry shifts that you feel on your company, or there are global pandemic shifts that we just have to adapt to. So you're just going to see all these kinds of things as like nature.
I would like to ask you this question, because I promised Christian that I will ask this question. I think it's somehow
it's the shortest question of the lot as well.
But I think it would make a cool a roundup of what we are talking here. So Christian is asking. So he read in your book that you are talking about 5 reteaming patterns: 1 by 1, grow and split, isolation, merging, and switching. And now the small question is, can you describe them? Maybe you can do it in a pitch, like in a very short summary.
So I derived these 5 patterns of team change based on the interviews that I did with global worldwide colleagues. And I think they're really kind of like base patterns. Someone joins, somebody leaves, grow and split into 2 teams. Companies merge together, or teams might merge together. You might have a team off to the side working on a new product, give them process freedom. And then there's that time when you're on a team and you feel like you're stagnating. You feel like you're not learning, or maybe you're sick of working with these people on this team and you're ready for a change. That's a switching pattern. And so I found that in my research, my bottoms up research from interviewing people in the industry, that these interviews just kind of, these 5 patterns just kind of emerged from that research. So I think when we're talking about reteaming, it's good to get specific. And not only those structural patterns, but also the scale of them. Are we talking about 500 people or 10 people? There's different advice and tactics due to those.
Yeah.
I like that.
Thank you.
And I thought that was going to be a very sort of, you'd have to recap the whole book in order to answer the question. And that's, very cool.
To the point.
Thank you. I try, but I can get wordy. That's why you write books, if you have a lot to say. So.
There's one comment that I really liked. Catherine Volkmer saying, "Thank you for being so incredibly direct and pragmatic. No fuzz, no mystery. Just focusing on what matters. People, work, workflow." And then she's asking if the recording will be available. To which, of course, I said yes. But yeah, some great feedback, which is really cool. So yeah. Cool. So I think we're pretty much out of time. So just a couple of things before we disappear. I want to just remind everybody, if you enjoy this, remember to subscribe, hit the bell button. Of course, you can also join us on Meetup, in which case you'll get invites not only for this event, but for other events that we're also hosting. And of course, if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, you can reach any of us on Twitter. I will be posting right now in the chat. You can see the links to reach us. We all love talking to people. So jump online, have a chat with us. We'd love to hear whatever you have to say. Maybe there was a question you didn't get an answer to, or you just want to connect and say hi. Come and join us. Yes, and I think outside, that's probably all. I just want to say thank you so much to Heidi for joining us today. It's been really wonderful to have a chat with you, both in the preparation and now. And I hope maybe we get to have a whiskey or a beer in person at some point in the future. Who knows when we're allowed to see each other in real life. But yeah, thanks so much for coming and for sharing all your wonderful insights. Cool. Klaus, anything from you?
No, I'm totally happy. And yeah, I just want to also say thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much. If anyone wants to read the book for free, you can do it at O'Reilly.com. And I have a code that hopefully you can send to people where you can access my book to read for free for 30 days. You can contact me at HeidiHelfand.com. So.
I just linked it in the chat. It'll be in the video notes and description as well. Nice. You can sign up for the free trial there. Cool. Thanks. Awesome. So thank you, everyone. And we will see you again in a few weeks. We're taking a break in 2 weeks' time, which would be the next episode. And we'll be live again in roughly 4 weeks, where we will most likely be talking to some wonderful friends from Brazil. So come and join us, and we will have some fun again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Goodbye. Cheers. Bye.